The fluorescent light in the dressing room flickered, while Sophia Mitchell remained in the corner, needle and thread in hand, mending yet another torn corset. At 23 years old, her life had been reduced to this: a backstage seamstress in her mother's infamous nightclub, surrounded by strippers and escorts who lived the freedom she could only dream of. Victoria Mitchell ruled this empire of flesh and desire with an iron fist. A feared madam who had built her fortune on the bodies of desperate women, Victoria controlled every aspect of Sophia's life with suffocating obsession. The world outside was dangerous, dirty, cruel, she would say, but she forced her daughter to spend entire nights in that den, sewing lingerie and listening to explicit conversations about how many men a woman could handle in a single night. The hypocrisy burned in Sophia's throat. She wasn't puritanical. It would be impossible to maintain such innocence, living with those women for years. What corroded her inside was the prison disguised as protection. Her mother kept her locked in an invisible cage, not allowing her to work anywhere else, not letting her study formally, with no friends besides Ethan, the only business partner of Victoria's who treated Sophia like a human being. On that specific night, while finishing adjusting one of the dancer's corsets, Sophia felt something different boiling inside her. An old rage, dammed up by years of forced obedience. She watched the semi-naked women preparing for the show, their bodies displayed without shame, their laughter loud and confident. They had something Sophia had never experienced: freedom of choice. Ethan appeared at her side, as he always did when he sensed her distress. Tall and thin, with kind eyes that contrasted with the brutal environment in which he worked, he was Sophia's only anchor of sanity in that place. He commented on how Victoria was more controlling lately, and Sophia exploded in a furious whisper about not being able to stand living like this anymore. She should be preparing a portfolio to get a better job, not there, sewing lingerie and listening about other people's sex lives. Ethan confessed that he wanted to get her out of that madness, but they both knew Victoria would never allow it. If he tried to help her, he would lose everything he had built. The conversation was interrupted when Victoria appeared like a storm, dragging Sophia by the hair away from Ethan. The physical pain was less than the humiliation of being treated like a child in front of everyone. Victoria took her to the private office and locked the door. The sermon was cruel and systematic. Victoria accused her daughter of ingratitude, of not recognizing everything she had done for her. She kept Sophia there to protect her from the world that had destroyed so many pretty young women. Sophia was her only real family, her blood, and Victoria would not allow her to become another whore selling her body for crumbs. There, at least, she had a roof, food, security. Sophia tried to argue that she wanted to work with fashion, create real clothes, not lingerie for prostitutes. Victoria laughed with disdain. Fashion was a ridiculous dream for a girl without formal education, without connections, with nothing beyond what her mother gave her. The real world would crush Sophia in a matter of days. The discussion ended as it always ended, with Victoria imposing her will and Sophia swallowing another defeat. But something had changed that night. A seed of rebellion had germinated, small but persistent. Hours later, when the club was buzzing with loud music and drunk men, Sophia found herself again with Ethan backstage. He noticed something different in her eyes, a determination he hadn't seen before. Sophia confessed that she was tired of being a prisoner. She wanted to experience just once what it was like to be free. Ethan was worried, but also intrigued. He asked what she had in mind. Sophia looked at the dancers preparing to go on stage, their sensual bodies wrapped in lace and glitter. A crazy, impossible idea began to take shape. She wanted to feel what it was like to be on that stage, to be seen, to be desired, not as a prostitute, but as someone in control of her own body, her own choice. Just one night. A single night of rebellion before returning to the prison that was her life. Ethan tried to dissuade her, warning about the dangers. Victoria would kill her if she found out. The men who frequented the club were dangerous, many of them connected to organized crime. But Sophia was determined. She asked for help to transform herself, to become unrecognizable. Ethan, against his better judgment, agreed. There was a special event that night, a private party at another club, more sophisticated, frequented by the elite of the underworld. He could get Sophia in as one of the new dancers. With the right makeup and costume, her own mother wouldn't recognize her. Then began the transformation. Sophia put on a platinum blonde wig that completely changed her features, heavy makeup that altered the shape of her eyes and lips, blue contact lenses that hid her natural brown. The dress was scandalously short, tight, made of a fabric that shone under the lights, extremely high heels that made her wobble in her first steps. When she looked in the mirror, Sophia barely recognized the woman staring back at her. She was someone else. A seductive and confident stranger. Ethan's eyes widened, impressed and worried at the same time. He made Sophia promise she would be careful, that she wouldn't get too close to anyone, that she would return before dawn. The club, where the private party would take place, was on the other side of town, in a neighborhood where dirty money mixed with political power. The place was refined, with luxurious decoration that made Victoria's club look like a fifth-rate dive bar. Men in expensive suits talked in groups, surrounded by stunning women. The air smelled of imported whiskey, Cuban cigars, and danger. Sophia felt her heart race when she entered. The music pulsed in the walls. Colored lights created hypnotizing shadows and reflections. Some dancers were already on the central stage, moving with calculated sensuality while men threw money bills. Ethan guided her through the backstage, quickly introducing her to the manager as a new hire. The man examined her with cold and calculating eyes, but nodded in approval. She would go on stage in the next round. While waiting, Sophia observed the audience. There were faces she vaguely recognized from newspapers and newscasts. Businessmen, politicians, and others who emanated a different kind of power. A power that came from fear, not respect. That's when she saw him. He was sitting in an elevated booth, separated from the common crowd. Even from afar, his presence was magnetic. Tall, broad shoulders perfectly filling the impeccable dark suit. Black hair combed back, revealing a face that seemed sculpted in marble. Square jaw, sensual lips, eyes so dark they looked like bottomless wells. But it wasn't just the physical beauty that drew attention. It was the aura of absolute power that emanated from him. The other men around subtly bowed in his presence, seeking his approval with furtive glances. He was clearly someone important, dangerous. Sophia should have looked away. She should have focused on her own imminent performance, but she was hypnotized, unable to stop watching him. He drank slowly from a glass of whiskey, talking to two men at his side, but his eyes scanned the environment with the precision of a predator evaluating territory. And then, as if feeling the weight of her gaze, he turned his head. Their eyes met through the dimness and distance. The impact was physical. Sophia felt as if all the air had been sucked from her lungs. He didn't look away, just studied her with an intensity that made her skin tingle. There was no smile on his lips, no obvious expression, but she felt the interest. Dark, dangerous, devastating. Someone touched her shoulder, startling her. It was her turn to go on stage. Sophia tried to control the trembling in her legs as she walked toward the lights. The music changed to something slower, sensual. She reached the center of the circular stage, surrounded by men who were already starting to pay attention. At first, her movements were hesitant, clumsy. Sophia had never danced like this, had never exposed herself this way. But then she remembered the purpose of that night. Freedom, choice, rebellion against everything Victoria represented. She closed her eyes and let the music guide her. Her hips began to move to the rhythm, more fluid, more confident. Her hands slid over her own body, tracing curves. When she opened her eyes again, several men were watching her with obvious desire, throwing money on the stage. But Sophia could only think of him, the man in the elevated booth. He continued watching, but unlike the others, there was no raw lust in his gaze. It was something more complex, more intense, as if he were memorizing every detail, every movement. The music ended, and Sophia descended from the stage, breathing heavily, adrenaline running through her veins. She had done it. She had really done it. She felt powerful, alive in a way she had never experienced. But the sensation was interrupted when the club manager appeared, followed by a man in a grey suit. The man examined her with calculating eyes, and then made an offer that left her speechless. The gentleman from the special booth wanted her. He was willing to pay $10,000 for a private night. Sophia felt her blood freeze. This wasn't what she had come for. She didn't want to prostitute herself. She just wanted to feel free for a few hours. She opened her mouth to refuse, but the man in the grey suit continued talking. He explained that the gentleman in question was not just any client. He was Dominic Salvatore, one of the most powerful and feared men in the city. To refuse would be a grave insult. The name echoed in Sophia's mind. Dominic Salvatore. She had already heard whispers about him, stories about a ruthless mafioso who controlled half the illegal businesses in the region. A man who knew no mercy, who eliminated enemies without hesitation. And this man wanted her. The manager pressed, saying that $10,000 was more than she would earn in months. It was an opportunity she couldn't refuse. Sophia looked around, searching for Ethan, but he had disappeared into the crowd. She was alone to make that decision. Her rational mind screamed to refuse and run away, but another part of her, the part that had gone on that stage seeking freedom, whispered something different. $10,000. It was enough money to escape from Victoria, to start a new life far from that hell. One night of sacrifice for a chance at true freedom. Before she could think better, Sophia heard herself agreeing. The man in the grey suit smiled, satisfied, and led her through the club corridors, climbing stairs that led to the private floors. They stopped in front of a double door of dark wood. The man knocked twice and entered, indicating that Sophia should follow him. The interior was luxurious, with leather furniture, a complete bar, and huge windows offering a panoramic view of the illuminated city. And there, standing near the windows, was him, Dominic Salvatore. Up close, he was even more impressive. He had to be about 35 years old, maybe more, but time had only refined his masculine beauty. The height was intimidating, muscles visible even under the perfectly cut suit. The hands were large, with prominent veins and subtle scars indicating a violent life. He turned when she entered, and again that look pierced through her. He studied Sophia from head to toe, lingering on each detail. He said nothing for long seconds, just drank his whiskey and analyzed her like a collector evaluating a rare piece. Finally, with a deep and velvety voice that made Sophia's skin crawl, he dismissed the other man. They were alone. The silence was heavy, charged with tension and expectation. Dominic asked her name. Sophia hesitated, knowing she couldn't use her real one. She improvised quickly, saying they called her Leah. He repeated the name slowly, as if experimenting with the taste. Then he asked if she knew who he was. Sophia nodded, admitting she had heard his name. Dominic arched an eyebrow, apparently impressed by her honesty. Most women pretended ignorance or threw themselves at his feet immediately, but Leah, as he now knew her, remained where she was, watching him with a mixture of fear and defiance that he found intriguing. He explained the rules. She would spend the night with him, do what he asked, and at dawn would receive payment and be free to leave. There would be no subsequent contact, no promises, nothing beyond that transaction. Sophia agreed with a nod, trying to maintain composure while her heart beat erratically. Dominic approached with slow and calculated steps. He stopped so close that Sophia could feel the heat emanating from him, the smell of his expensive perfume mixed with something more primitive. He extended his hand and touched her face, rough fingers tracing the line of her jaw. He commented that she seemed different from the others. There was something in her eyes, a poorly disguised innocence that contrasted with forced confidence. He asked if she really did this professionally or if she was pretending. The question caught Sophia off guard. For a moment she thought about lying, but something in his gaze made her believe he would see through the lie. So she admitted, with an almost inaudible voice, that it was her first time doing something like this. Dominic tilted his head, surprised and clearly more interested. He asked why then she had accepted. Sophia didn't have an answer that made sense, so she just told the truth. She needed the money, and for one night wanted to feel what it was like to make her own choices. Something changed in his expression. The usual hardness softened slightly, replaced by something that could be curiosity or even understanding. Dominic stepped back, returning to the bar and pouring 2 glasses of whiskey. He offered one to Sophia, who accepted with trembling hands. They drank in silence, the tension still present but somehow different. Dominic began asking questions: where she was from, what she did when she wasn't in nightclubs, why she needed money so badly. Sophia answered vaguely, keeping identifiable details hidden, but being honest enough to seem authentic. He shared little about himself, just oblique comments about a world where power and violence were currencies of exchange. He spoke about growing up in a family where love was weakness and trust a dangerous illusion, about inheriting an empire built on blood and learning early that feelings were vulnerabilities to be eradicated. There was a devastating loneliness hidden beneath those words, an involuntary admission that all that power had cost him his humanity. Sophia found herself feeling something unexpected: compassion. That feared man, who made others tremble with just a look, was fundamentally alone. The hours passed strangely. They talked more than Sophia expected, sharing fragments of themselves between sips of whiskey and charged silences. The physical attraction was undeniable, electric in the air between them, but Dominic didn't rush. He seemed to be savoring the anticipation, or perhaps genuinely interested in knowing her beyond the obvious. It was almost midnight when he finally approached again. This time, there was no hesitation in his movements. Dominic kissed her, and it was like being consumed by fire. The kiss was dominating, demanding, but also surprisingly gentle. His hands explored her body over the dress, memorizing each curve, and Sophia felt herself melting. He guided her to the adjacent bedroom, luxuriously decorated with a huge bed in the center. Dominic's hands slid down Sophia's back, finding the dress zipper and lowering it slowly. The fabric slipped over her shoulders, revealing the minimal lingerie underneath. Dominic stopped for a moment, just admiring. He commented that she was beautiful, a work of art that deserved to be appreciated. Sophia felt a blush rise up her neck. She had never been looked at like this, with such a mixture of desire and reverence. He laid her on the bed carefully, as if she were something fragile and precious. His own clothes were removed efficiently, revealing a muscular body marked by scars from past battles. Dominic covered her body with his, the weight comforting and exciting at the same time. What followed was a night of discoveries and intense sensations. Dominic was experienced, knowing exactly where to touch, how to provoke, when to be gentle, and when to be more intense. He guided Sophia through her first experience with surprising patience, paying attention to each reaction, adjusting his movements to hers. There were moments of initial discomfort, but Dominic smoothed them over with kisses and distracting caresses. He whispered words in Italian, some of which Sophia didn't understand, but that seemed loaded with meaning. When they finally united completely, the intensity was overwhelming. Sophia felt lost in sensations, her body responding in ways she never imagined possible. Dominic led her through growing waves of pleasure, each stronger than the previous, until she broke in his arms, trembling and breathless. Afterward, lying next to each other in the darkness, there was a different silence, not uncomfortable but heavy with unspoken meaning. Dominic pulled her against his chest, fingers tracing lazy patterns on her skin. He commented that she had surprised him, that there was something about her that intrigued him in ways he didn't completely understand. Sophia should have remained silent, maintaining the emotional distance the situation required, but instead, nestled against that dangerous and lonely man, she felt an unexpected connection. something that transcended the physical, that touched deeper and more vulnerable places in both. They made love again before dawn, this time slower, more intimate. It wasn't just transactional sex, it was something more, something neither dared to name. And when the first light began to filter through the windows, Sophia knew that night had changed her in ways that would take time to understand. Dominic got up and dressed in silence. He took a thick envelope from his jacket and placed it on the nightstand. The money, as promised, but when he looked at Sophia, still lying in bed with sheets partially covering her body, there was something different in his eyes, an emotion he quickly masked. He said she could stay as long as she needed, that his team would take her back when she was ready. Then, without more words, he left. Sophia remained there alone, her body still marked by his touches, her mind struggling to process what had happened. She should feel shame or regret, but all she felt was a strange melancholy, as if she had found something precious only to see it slip through her fingers. She dressed slowly, took the envelope without looking at its contents, and left that luxurious room. A driver was waiting, as Dominic had promised, and took her back to the other side of town in silence. When she arrived at her mother's club, it was already morning. Ethan was waiting anxiously, relieved to see her safe. Sophia reassured him, saying she was fine, that nothing terrible had happened, but she couldn't share the details, the complex emotions the night had awakened. She gave half the money to Ethan, as thanks for his help. He tried to refuse, but Sophia insisted. The other half she hid in a safe place, starting her escape fund. In a few weeks, maybe months, she would have enough to disappear from Victoria's life forever. But in the following days, Sophia discovered that escaping that night would be impossible. Not just because the memories haunted her thoughts constantly, but because her body began to change in subtle and alarming ways. Morning nausea, unexplained fatigue, breast tenderness. Initially, she denied it, attributing it to stress symptoms. But when her period didn't come, panic began to set in. A pregnancy test confirmed her worst fears. Sophia was pregnant, with Dominic Salvatore's child, the most feared mafioso in the city, a man she knew only by name and terrible reputation, a man who had made it clear that night would have no consequences. The terror was paralyzing. Victoria would kill her if she found out. But more than that, how would she raise a child alone? How would she escape now that she carried a life inside her? The money she had saved wouldn't be enough to support them both for long. Sophia spent days in silent panic, trying to figure out what to do. Ethan noticed something was wrong and pressed her until she confessed. The pregnancy, the Mafia father, the impossibility of the situation. Ethan was shocked, but promised to help in any way possible. It was 2 weeks of anguish before the situation changed drastically. Sophia was at the club when one of Victoria's henchmen arrived, saying there were important visitors, men who should not be contradicted. Sophia didn't pay much attention, focused on her sewing, until she heard a voice that made her blood freeze, the deep and unmistakable voice of Dominic Salvatore. He was there, at the club, talking to Victoria about business. Sophia hid backstage, heart beating frantically. She couldn't let him see her there. Not as the madam's daughter, not pregnant with his child, but fate had other plans. Victoria called her, ordering her to bring drinks for the important visitors. Sophia had no choice but to obey. She kept her head down, hoping he wouldn't recognize her without the blonde wig and heavy makeup. But Dominic recognized her immediately. His eyes widened with shock, then narrowed with understanding and something darker. Anger, perhaps, or betrayal. Sophia felt his gaze burning her skin as she served drinks with trembling hands. Victoria noticed the tension and asked if there was a problem. Dominic responded softly that no, he just thought he recognized the young woman. Victoria laughed, explaining it was her daughter, kept away from business for her own protection. The sarcasm in her voice was palpable. Dominic said nothing for a moment, processing that information. Then he asked to speak with Sophia privately about a sewing service for his own employees. Victoria hesitated, suspicious, but couldn't refuse such an important and dangerous client. Sophia was led to a private office, with Dominic following behind. As soon as the door closed, he exploded in contained fury. He demanded to know who she really was, why she had lied, if that night had been an elaborate game to blackmail him or get something from his organization. Sophia tried to explain, words coming out rushed. She hadn't lied about anything that really mattered. She just wanted one night of freedom. Didn't know who he was until it was too late. Never imagined they would see each other again. Dominic didn't believe her, accusing her of being a spy for some rival faction, sent to seduce him and find vulnerabilities. The discussion became more intense when Sophia, desperate, finally revealed the complete truth. She was pregnant. The child was his, there was no possible doubt, because he had been her first and only man. She didn't want anything from him, didn't plan to blackmail him or create problems. She just needed him to leave her alone, to deal with the situation by herself. The silence that followed was deafening. Dominic remained completely still, processing that bomb. A pregnancy, his child, with the daughter of a madam who occasionally did business with his organization. The irony and complexity of the situation were overwhelming. Finally, with dangerously calm voice, he asked what she planned to do. Sophia said she would run away as soon as she could, would take the baby far away, and he would never need to worry about them. Dominic studied her for long seconds, then shook his head. That's not how things would happen. He explained, with an authority that admitted no arguments, that she was carrying his heir, a Salvatore. That child was too valuable to be abandoned with a fugitive mother without resources. Sophia protested, but he cut her off. There was only one viable solution. She would move into his house under his protection until the baby was born. Then they would decide how to proceed. Sophia was horrified by the proposal. Live under the same roof as him? Impossible. Dominic wasn't asking permission. He was informing a decision. She would come voluntarily or be taken by force. Besides, staying with Victoria during a pregnancy was dangerous. The madam wouldn't hesitate to force an abortion if she found out and thought it would ruin her business. The logic was undeniable, as terrible as it was. Sophia knew Victoria would react violently. And as for raising the baby alone, without money or support, it seemed increasingly impossible. But trusting Dominic Salvatore, a man known for his cruelty, was equally terrifying. Dominic perceived her hesitation and softened his tone slightly. He promised she wouldn't be a prisoner, would have her own room, her privacy. He would provide everything she needed for a healthy pregnancy. In exchange, she only needed to stay safe and take care of the baby until birth. Afterward, if she wanted to leave, he wouldn't stop her, as long as the child stayed with him. The idea of losing the baby after carrying it for 9 months was devastating. But Sophia had no real choices. Reluctantly, she agreed to the terms. Dominic wasted no time. That same night, he talked to Victoria, creating an elaborate story about needing a personal seamstress to live on his property. He offered a generous amount that Victoria couldn't refuse, especially coming from someone so powerful. The madam didn't even question much, relieved to get rid of the daughter she considered a burden. Sophia packed quickly, taking only the essentials. Ethan intercepted her before she left, worried and confused. She reassured him as best she could, saying she would finally have her chance to escape. She didn't mention the pregnancy or the true nature of her new situation. Dominic's mansion was on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by high walls and heavy security. It was impressive, with extensive gardens and architecture that mixed modernity with classic elements. Sophia was taken to a spacious room on the second floor, luxuriously furnished, but strangely impersonal. A middle-aged woman named Rosa, the housekeeper, explained the house rules. Sophia would have access to most common areas, but certain wings were forbidden. Meals would be served at regular hours. If she needed anything, she should ask Rosa. And above all, she shouldn't ask questions about Dominic's business or his comings and goings. The first days were strangely isolated. Sophia barely saw Dominic. who was apparently busy with matters of his organization. She spent hours cautiously exploring the property, reading in the gardens, trying to process the absurd turn her life had taken. It was on the fourth day that they finally had a real conversation. Dominic appeared at dinner, sitting at the other end of the long mahogany table. He asked how she was feeling, if the room was comfortable, if she needed anything. The concern seemed genuine, which confused Sophia. She responded that she was fine, physically at least. Mentally, she was struggling to accept reality. Dominic nodded, as if understanding. Then he made a surprising offer. If she wanted to continue developing her sewing skills, he could provide materials and even hire a private teacher. Pregnancy didn't mean she needed to abandon her dreams completely. The unexpected gesture touched Sophia deeply. She accepted, and in the following days, fine fabrics arrived, professional sewing machines, books about fashion design. An experienced teacher began visiting her 3 times a week, guiding projects and expanding her techniques. Slowly, a routine was established. Sophia woke early, had breakfast alone, spent mornings studying and sewing, had lunch, rested during afternoons due to pregnancy fatigue, and eventually had dinner. Sometimes Dominic joined her for meals, other times he didn't. When they dined together, the conversations were curiously normal. They talked about books, music, even international politics. Dominic revealed himself to be surprisingly well-educated and eloquent when not in Mafia mode. Sophia shared her observations about the world, her opinions formed through voracious reading, since she had never been able to travel or experience much directly. There was an incident in the first weeks that changed something fundamental between them. Sophia was exploring the library when she accidentally found a locked room. Curious, she tried the doorknob, and the door opened, revealing an obviously private office of Dominic's. There were scattered documents, maps with markings, and a gun on top of the desk. She should have left immediately, but was fascinated by an entire wall covered with photographs. They were images of Dominic at different ages, some with an older man who was clearly his father. There were also photos of other men, some marked with red X's, eliminated enemies, presumably. Sophia didn't notice Dominic entering until it was too late. He stood in the doorway, expression unreadable. She expected fury, but he just sighed tiredly. He asked her to leave and never enter there again without permission. The tone wasn't threatening, just tired and slightly defeated. Later that night, Dominic went to her room. Sophia thought he would come to reprimand her properly, but he just sat in the armchair near the window and remained silent for long minutes. Finally, he began to speak. He told about his father, a brutal man who ruled through fear, about growing up knowing that love was a luxury they couldn't afford, that each person around was a potential traitor or tool, about taking over the empire at 25 when his father was murdered, and discovering that maintaining power was even bloodier than conquering it. He admitted he never imagined having children. He thought he would spend his life alone, surrounded by soldiers and subordinates, but fundamentally isolated. And now, by a whim of fate, he would have an heir with a woman he barely knew but who intrigued him in disturbing ways. Sophia listened to everything in silence, seeing for the first time the man behind the fearsome reputation. When he finished, she shared her own story, about Victoria and the prison disguised as protection, about postponed dreams and denied freedom, about that single night of rebellion that changed everything. It was in that moment, sharing vulnerabilities in the semi-darkness, that something changed between them. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the beginning of mutual understanding. Two prisoners of lives they didn't choose, united by impossible circumstances. The weeks passed, and Sophia's belly began to grow visibly. Dominic insisted she see the best doctors, do all prenatal exams. He attended some of the ultrasounds, becoming strangely quiet when seeing the baby's image on the screen. It was during one of these ultrasounds that they discovered the sex. A boy. Dominic held Sophia's hand when the news was given, squeezing with an emotion he clearly struggled to control. Later, in the car returning home, he confessed he had no idea how to be a father. Sophia admitted she also didn't know how to be a mother. "Maybe we can figure it out together," she suggested. The proposal hung in the air, loaded with implications. It wasn't just about co-parenting. It was about building something together when everything in their lives had prepared them for solitude. Dominic didn't respond immediately, but that night he took Sophia to the garden. Under the starry sky, he spoke about his own fear, not of enemies or betrayal, but of becoming like his father, of repeating the cycle of coldness and cruelty that had defined his family for generations. He didn't want his son to grow up fearing him. Sophia placed her hand on her growing belly and said something that surprised both. She stated she could already see he would be different. A man capable of so much vulnerability, of recognizing his own fears, wasn't doomed to repeat his father's mistakes. He had a choice. Dominic looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. Then slowly, he placed his own hand on her belly, feeling the baby move. The moment was intimate in a way that transcended the physical. It was connection, hope, the possibility of something better. But the fragile peace they were building was shattered when Sophia's true identity was revealed explosively. One of Dominic's rivals discovered about the pregnancy, and more importantly, about who the baby's mother was. Victoria Mancini wasn't just an ordinary madam. She was the widow of Marco Mancini, one of the old Mafia bosses who had ruled territories for decades. When Marco died, Victoria took over his businesses, transforming prostitution into her empire. And there was a dirty history between the Mancini and Salvatore families. An old vendetta, unavenged betrayals, blood spilled on both sides. The news reached Dominic through one of his oldest advisors. Sophia Mancini, daughter of Marco and Victoria, was pregnant with his child. The implication was devastating. Dominic had been manipulated, seduced as part of an elaborate revenge plan. The baby was a trap, a way to infiltrate the Salvatore family. Dominic's fury was explosive. He confronted Sophia with venomous accusations. She knew exactly who he was from the beginning. All that innocence act was rehearsed performance. Victoria had sent her to seduce him, get pregnant, gain his trust. And he, like an idiot, had fallen into the trap. Sophia tried to defend herself desperately. She didn't know about any plan, didn't know the history between the families. Victoria had never told her about Marco or his life. She had grown up deliberately ignorant about her mother's business, kept isolated for years. That night at the club was genuine rebellion, not calculated conspiracy. But Dominic was blind with rage and feeling of betrayal. He ordered Sophia to be confined to her room, guards posted outside. He needed to think, decide what to do with her and the child she carried. Each advisor had a different opinion. Some suggested eliminating her, the baby too. Others proposed keeping her prisoner until birth, then discarding her. And there were those who saw opportunity, use the baby as leverage against Victoria. Sophia spent days locked up, terrified and desperate. The baby moved constantly in her womb, as if feeling her agony. She talked to him, promising she would protect him no matter what happened, even if it cost her own life. It was Rosa, the housekeeper, who broke the rules to help her. The older woman had developed genuine affection for Sophia during the months of coexistence. One night, she entered the room with food and a whispered proposal. She knew a secret path out of the property used by servants in older times. Sophia could escape, disappear before Dominic made a fatal decision. The temptation was enormous. But Sophia hesitated. Running away would confirm all of Dominic's suspicions. Besides, where would she go? Victoria would certainly reject her if she knew about the pregnancy and the confusion it had caused. Without money or allies, she wouldn't survive long on the streets with a baby on the way. Before she could decide, the situation changed again. There was an attack on the mansion, rival faction trying to take advantage of Dominic's moment of vulnerability. Shots echoed through the property, men shouting orders, the smell of gunpowder in the air. Sophia heard everything, terrified, from her room. The guards who watched her were repositioned to defend the main house, leaving her alone. She barricaded the door, praying that the thick walls would protect her. The baby kicked frantically, as if also sensing the danger. The attack lasted hours that seemed like eternity. Eventually, silence returned, heavy and ominous. Sophia didn't know if Dominic had survived, if the attackers won. What would happen to her now? The door opened violently, torn from its hinges. Sophia screamed, instinctively covering her belly, but it was Dominic entering, covered in blood that clearly wasn't all his. He was wounded, limping slightly, but alive and furious. He examined her quickly, making sure she was unharmed. Then, without words, he picked her up in his arms and carried her out of the room. Sophia protested, confused, but he silenced her with a look. He took her to an underground part of the mansion, a fortified bunker she didn't know existed. There, finally safe, Dominic placed her gently on a sofa and collapsed beside her. He breathed with difficulty, holding his flank where a bullet had grazed him. Sophia temporarily forgot the fear and anger between them, focusing on helping him. She tore part of her own clothes to make an improvised bandage, pressing the wound to stop the bleeding. While working, Dominic watched her with an indecipherable expression. Finally, with a hoarse voice, he asked why she was helping him. After everything he had accused her of, how he had treated her in recent days, she should be happy to see him wounded. Sophia simply responded that whether he wanted to believe it or not, she never wished to hurt him. And regardless of everything, he was her baby's father. She didn't want the child to grow up without a father. The words seemed to break something in Dominic. He closed his eyes, exhausted and defeated. He confessed he had investigated thoroughly during the days he kept her imprisoned. Every claim she had made proved true. Victoria really had kept her ignorant, isolated from Marco's life. There was no conspiracy, just cruel fate bringing them together. And more importantly, he had realized something during the attack, when he believed enemies might reach her. The terror he felt was visceral, primitive. It wasn't just about the baby, it was about her, Sophia, the woman who had entered his life as a temporary transaction and gradually become something much more significant. Sophia felt tears burn her eyes. Months of tension, fear, and repressed emotions finally exploding. She asked with a broken voice if he really believed her now, or if there would always be doubt, mistrust poisoning any possibility between them. Dominic opened his eyes and pulled her closer, ignoring the pain of his wound. He admitted that living in his world had taught him to never trust anyone completely, but he was willing to try, with her, because the alternative, a life without her and without the possibility of what could be between them, was unbearable. It was a turning point. It didn't solve everything magically, but established a new foundation. Fragile trust, but genuine. Both agreeing to try to build something real despite everything that separated them. The following months were of healing and gradual approach. Dominic treated his wound and drastically reinforced the property's security. The rival faction that attacked was systematically eliminated, a clear message to others who would consider threatening him. Sophia continued her pregnancy, now with Dominic genuinely involved. He attended all ultrasounds, helped decorate what would be the baby's room, even read books about fatherhood when he thought no one was watching. They talked more, sharing not just vulnerabilities, but also hopes. Sophia spoke about raising a child with love, something neither had really known. Dominic promised he would do differently, that he would break the cycle of cruelty that had defined his lineage. There was also physical rapprochement, not immediate, but gradual. It began with innocent touches, hands meeting during walks in the garden. Then soft kisses, emotional reconnection that slowly became physical again. Dominic was careful with her pregnant body, almost reverent, treating her like something infinitely precious. One night in the 8th month of pregnancy, Dominic finally expressed what he had been feeling but feared to admit. He said he loved her, not just as the mother of his child, but as the woman who had made him want to be better, who had challenged his beliefs about love being weakness, showing it was actually strength. Sophia, tears running freely, confessed she also loved him. Despite everything they had been through, perhaps because of it. He wasn't perfect, carried darkness she would never completely understand. But he also had capacity for tenderness, for change, for love she never expected to find. The marriage proposal came in a non-traditional way. Dominic explained that in his world, family meant legal and social protection. Getting married wouldn't change their feelings, but would solidify their position as a unit. It would give Sophia real power within the organization, protection no one would dare challenge. Sophia accepted, not for protection, but because she genuinely wanted to commit to him, build a life together, raise their son as a true family. The wedding was simple, private, just a few trusted witnesses, but the meaning was profound. 2 weeks after the ceremony, Sophia went into labor. It was 18 exhausting hours, Dominic by her side during every moment. When their son was finally born, small but healthy, both cried. The baby was named David Salvatore, and holding that little being, Dominic knew his life had changed irrevocably. The first months of fatherhood were challenging, sleepless nights, constant adjustments, learning to care for such a fragile being, but they were also filled with moments of unexpected beauty. David's first smile, his little fingers gripping Dominic's finger, the sound of his laughter when Sophia rocked him gently. Dominic discovered that paternal love was different from everything he had known. It was simultaneously terrifying and liberating. He began delegating more responsibilities in the organization, prioritizing time with family. He didn't completely abandon his business, but established limits that had never existed before. Sophia flourished in her role as mother and wife. She continued developing her design skills, even starting a small custom clothing business. Dominic fully supported her, proud to see her achieving dreams Victoria had tried to crush. There were still challenges. Victoria tried to reconnect when she learned about the marriage and grandson, but Sophia maintained firm distance. The woman who had imprisoned her for years would not have access to the son she had sworn to protect. It was painful, but necessary. There were also external threats, enemies who saw the baby as vulnerability to exploit. But Dominic eliminated these threats with brutal efficiency, making it clear his family was beyond any limit. On David's first birthday, Sophia organized a small party in the mansion garden. Watching Dominic play with their son, so different from the cold man she had met that fateful night, she felt deep gratitude. The path they had traveled was tortuous, painful at times, but it had led them to something real and true. Dominic found her later that night, after David had fallen asleep. He embraced her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder, both looking at the illuminated city below. He commented that he never imagined happiness was possible for someone like him. Sophia turned in his arms, kissing him gently. She said love had always been possible. He just needed to allow himself to believe. Dominic smiled, that rare and genuine smile that was only hers, and kissed her again. In that moment, with the family they had built together, sleeping peacefully, the painful past seemed distant. They had started as strangers in a temporary transaction. They went through betrayal, mistrust, danger. But somehow, against all odds, they found love. Real, complicated, imperfect, but strong enough to resist. And as they stood there embraced under the starry sky, both knew they had exactly where they belonged. It wasn't the life either had imagined, but it was theirs. Built together, fiercely protected, deeply loved, the future would still bring challenges. Dominic's world would never be completely safe, but they would face everything together, as family, and that certainty was stronger than any fear.